Hello, hi, good morning everyone. So, I will be discussing what is poetry. How do you define poetry? Do you have a favorite poem? Perhaps a favorite poet? What makes a poem good? Do you know what makes up a poem? Do you write poems? Or do you just enjoy reading them? So, while we're pondering on these questions, and before we get into our poetry reading, what exactly is the definition of poetry? So, poetry, according to Merriam-Webster, formulates a concentrated imaginative awareness of experience in the language chosen and arranged to create a specific emotional response through meaning, sound, and rhythm. It is also a composition in verse or comparable patterned arrangement of language in which the expression of feelings and ideas are given intensity by the use of distinctive style and rhythm. So poetry is also defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as traditionally associated with explicit formal departure from the different patterns of ordinary speech or prose in the use of elevated diction, figurative language, and syntactical reordering. So, sobrang technical ng pagkakadefine ng both dictionary, pero both definitions stressed on four of these elements. So, poetry is a patterned arrangement of language. It generates rhythm, express and evoke specific emotions or feelings, and these feelings are either expressed in a concentrated way or with intensity. I'm sure we're a bit familiar na with the poetic subgenres and kinds since napagdaanan na siguro in high school and senior high. We have the narrative poetry, which includes prose, ballad, epics, and dramatic poetry, which includes verse, drama, and dialogues. We also have lyric poetry, ode or elegy, the descriptive or observational lyrics, which reflects the speaker's point of view, and the dramatic monologue, or the dramatic lyric or lyric in expression. So just to clear things, to clarify the distinction between verse drama and dramatic poetry, and the dramatic lyric and dramatic monologue, the verse drama is usually a dialogue that are spoken by the characters in a drama or play, while dramatic lyric is usually sung as a lyric or with expression. So for our poetry reading, we will be reading Ode to Nightingale. Ode to Nightingale was written by John Keats when he was just 23 years old. It was written in the May of 1819 in England, and the poem is a regular ode with 8 stanzas and 10 pentameter lines. So it is also a personal poem which describes Keats' journey into the state of negative capability. So I'll be reading the poem and you can just follow as I read. Ode to Nightingale. My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense as though of hemlock I had drunk or emptied some dull opiate to the dreams. 1 minute passed, and Leithwards had sunk. 'Tis not true envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thine happiness, that thou light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beechen green and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. Oh, for a drought of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and the country green, dance and provincial song, and sunburnt mirth, or for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hypocrite, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim, and purple-stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim, fade far away, dissolve, and quite forget what thou among the leaves hast never known, the weariness, the fever, and the fret, here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow, and leaden-eyed despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his parts, but on the viewless wings of poesy. Though the dull brain perplexes and retards, already with thee tender is the night, and happily the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry face. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown, through venturous glooms and winding mossy ways. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in embalmed darkness guess each sweet, wherewith the seasonable month endows. The grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn, and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies and summer eyes. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my sweet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to seize upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy, still wouldest thou sing, and I have ears in vain. To thy high requiem became a sod. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird, no hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self same song that I found a path through the sad heart of Ruth when sick for home. She stood in tears amid the alien corn, the same that oftentimes hath charmed magic casements opening in the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. Forlorn the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my soul self. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades, past the near meadows over the still stream, up the hillside, and out is buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music, do I wake or sleep? May of 1890. So while the poem's still fresh in our minds, let's see if we can analyze Keats' poem using the elements of poetry. First, we have the speaker. So the speaker answers the question, whose voice do we hear? Most of the time, the voice in the poem is directly from the poet. Kasi minsan gumagawa sila ng separate character who will act as the voice of the poem. And these characters may often express ideas or feelings that is different from the poet's own. So in the narrative poems, a narrator is always present. It's not that different from the short stories of fiction or dramas, wherein someone is always narrating the story. In dramatic monologues, no narrator is present, since the monologues are spoken by a single fictional character in a specific time or dramatic situation, very much like character in a play. In the lyric and speaker, unlikely the other two, unlike the other two, it's much challenging to identify the speaker of this poem, especially if the gender of the speaker is unclear. Usually, we will have to depend on the words used in the poem to identify the gender of the speaker. Does the speaker use soft-spoken words? Gentle ba pagkakasabi? Is it brass, swift, slow, or fast? It depends on the words used in the poem. So if we ever find ourselves wondering kung sino yung speaker and we have to identify the gender, we can rely on the words used in the poem or the rhythm, meter, and the sounds it creates. For example, if the words are gentle or soft with a F sound or a T sound, most likely the speaker is female. Or if it just uses feminine sounds or words, the speaker is probably female. But if it's brass, or it has a stronger sound like R and D, and it's fast, then the speaker might be a male. Or if it uses many words, many masculine words in the poem, then the speaker must be a male. So, in the Ode of the Nightingale, since the poem is personal to Keats, then we can probably say that the voice in the poem was his, or the voice in the poem was him, since he wrote the poem from his own perspective. Next, we have the situation and setting. So, kung ang speaker ay sumasagot sa tanong na sino or who, sa situation and setting naman, it answers the questions what and why. So, in situation, we answer the questions sino ang ina-address ng speaker. Is there an auditor or someone at the receiving end? And is the event significant? So, sa Ode in the Nightingale, sino yung kinakausap ni Keats? May kinakausap ba siya sa tula or meron ba siyang ina-address? Or is it just an entire monologue that he made for himself? Is he longing for something? And how significant is the nightingale in the events of the story? So, ayan yung mga questions that we're hoping to uncover sa tula ni Keats. And those are the questions that will probably run in our minds after reading the poem. So, sa setting naman, we have the spatial setting, or kung saan naganap yung poem, and the temporal setting, or kung anong oras siya naganap. Since some poems are written for certain historical time or event, and these are called referentials or referential poems. These poems are written for historical purposes, or for the being that they are written to explore the history or the events or situation from that time or current time. So for the theme and tone, what a poem says involves its theme, and how a poem makes that statement involves its tone. So the what in themes is the message or the statement that you thought of after reading the poem. What is it about? And the how is for the tone of the poem, or how did that make you feel, or how did the poem make you feel. So the tone is the poem's attitude or feelings toward its topic. Also refers to a speaker's intended effect. Tone is closely related to style and diction. It shows a real person's feelings, manner, and relationship to a listener or a particular subject or situation. So since tone is the intended effect of the speaker, it's the feeling that the speaker wants the readers or audience to feel. In Ode of Nightingale, there is a hint of melancholy in Keats' narrative, since he pictures himself standing alone in a dark forest, listening to the enchanting and beautiful song of the nightingale with a hint of envy. Because unlike the nightingale, Keats was slowly waiting or embracing his death, and along the lines of the poem he said that death will not come to the immortal bird such as the nightingale, and for some reason he envies the nightingale for that. Our response to the tone of the poem guides us to the understanding of its theme or themes. The theme is what the poem expresses about its topic, and the theme is not simply a work's subject or its topic, it is a statement about that topic. So, what possible themes can we get from the poem's tone? Since Keats is obvious or envious of the melodious nightingale and how carefree it was, Keats probably wants to be just like the nightingale, and he wants to be as free and as happy as the bird, which can be a form of escapism. Or since there are mentions of death and embracing of death, and how Keats wanted uh, to slowly embrace the idea of death, and how he's just waiting for it to end, or if death is going to come to him, will he succumb to it? Will he let it embrace him and take him? Will he just stand still and let it engulf him, or will he keep listening to the bird as it sings in the night? So, those are the possible themes that we can formulate after reading the poem. So, the theme and conflict. Identifying the theme can sometimes be tricky in a poem, since it requires us to analyze the elements of the poem altogether, which is why it often helps if we find it, it helps us find the theme when we first focus on the conflict of the poem. So, if we ever get stuck at the theme of the poem or what the poem's message is about, it's important to go back to the conflict of the poem, since it will most likely lead us to its theme. So, even the most spotless poem, no matter how perfect or happy or romantic it sounds, a poem will always have conflict. And if you ever find yourself having difficulties at the theme, knowing the poem's conflict may help. Like, ano ba yung pinaka-struggle ng speaker o persona doon sa poem? Like, even if the tone or the general tone is happy or romantic, a conflict is still present, and it will guide you to the theme of the poem. So, word choice and order. Poems often depend on particular meanings and implications, as well as the sound and shape of individual words. Unlike dramas and fiction, where we can focus on the plot and the characters, in poetry, we often rely on the words used, since poems are often short. Most poems only contain essential words, kaya mas nare-require sa poetry i-dissect almost all the words it contains para lang ma-interpret yung poem as a whole. So, if ikukumpara natin yung drama and fiction, we can always interpret or analyze a short story based on its characters, setting, and plot. Whereas in poetry, we can only analyze so much since iilang stanza lang ba ang poetry minsan. Not all of them are long, and it depends pa sa length kung gaano siya kahaba. And some poems contains like one set of stanzas, and that's enough to be called as a poem. So paano mo yun i-analyze, i-interpret, or how will you dissect a poem kung wala siyang plot or characters or setting na pinagmulan? So, we mostly rely sa words that the poem contains. Kasi yun lang yung pinaka-essential na nandoon. Bukod doon, the only thing that we can rely on is probably the structure and the sounds it makes, the rhythm, the meter, the and the sounds of the poetry when we read it. Pero apart from those, we can only rely on the words, the word choice, and the order, and yung pagkakasulat mismo ng author or ng poet. So the poet's word choice or the diction of the poem determines not only meaning but also every effect that the poem produces. So hindi lang yung word choice or yung diction ng poem yung nag-determine ng meaning or theme or tone ng altogether ng poem, but nandun din yung effect and kung ano yung intended meaning or yung gustong iparating mismo ng poet nandoon mismo sa words na ginagamit niya. So we have to pay very close attention sa mga words, sequencing, and sa pagkakahili-hilingan ng words sa poem para ma-interpret or identify talaga natin kung ano yung gustong iparating ng poet. So, in word choice and order, we have the precision and ambiguity, or wordplay. So, wordplay is how the poet uses the words in the poem to make a point or to make a specific word stand out. Wordplay is usually used for dramatic irony or for irony or just to cause an intended impact or effect on the readers. Wordplays can be seen depending on how the poet wants the readers to view that specific word as something more significant than just what it intends to do. Like, wordplays are used for irony kasi that word connotes different meanings, hindi lang isa, kundi more than one. And that is why it creates an effect or a wordplay in the poem. Next, we have the denotation and connotation. I think we're all familiar with denotation and connotation, since denotation is the dictionary word while connotation is the emotional or distinct meaning attached to the word. There is a positive and negative connotation depending on the words used in the poem. For example, the word cheap. The positive connotation could be thrifty, and the negative could be cheap as itself, or greedy. Being cheap could be attributed to being greedy. Depending on the context or connotation, it can be negative or positive as being thrifty. So next, we also have the word order and placement, since individual words can qualify or amplify each other when used together or when placed together. It really matters how we read and view these words when they're paired up. So the use of words and its placement also has an intended effect on the audience or reader. which is why how the words are put together and where the individual words are located matters. Because may intended effect din siya. Hindi lang siya nilagay dyan ng author or ng poet para lang magkaroon ng make sense or to rhyme or to have a meter. It amplifies or qualify each other para may makuha siyang effect or feeling from the readers. It has a purpose. It has an order. Kaya siya magkasama because there's an intended feeling or effect na gustong makuha ng poet from the reader. So it's very important to pay attention on how the words are located and put together because there is an intended meaning for that, most likely. Next, we have imagery and figures of speech. So the visuals of a poetry may result partly from the two aspects of poetic language, the precision of words and its ambiguity. Visualization can also derive from sophisticated rhetorical and literary devices or the figures of speech. Figures of speech. So, time and time and again, we're all familiar with the figures or the 9 figures of speech. But here are some of the most notable figures that can be often found in poems. We have the metaphor or describing something as if it were something else. So in Ode to Nightingale, the nightingale is always described metaphorically since Keats associated the nightingale to freedom. There is also personification or treating an abstraction as if it were a person in the Ode to Nightingale, since Keats described beauty with lustrous eyes in line 29 and the moon as a queen sitting in a throne in line 36. So simile and analogy, a quick, explicit, or elaborate comparison. Any quick comparison or obvious comparison is a simile. Basta may word na like, tas nagko-compare. That's a clear indication of a simile. For example, I forgot what line it was, but Keats said, "Forlorn is like a bell, can be heard ringing in the dark forest where he was standing." So that can be a simile on its own. Next, we have the allusion. It is a brief reference to fictitious place, person, thing, or stories. And Keats made several allusions in the poem regarding Greek and Roman mythology. One primary example was the nightingale again, which refers to Philomela, a Greek mythological figure or symbol who's identified as the daughter of the king of Athens. So, the nightingale is a symbol of Philomela, a Greek mythological figure or symbol. The word Lethe in the poem also refers to the river in Greece, and another set of words such as Tempe and Arcady are also used in the poem. These are the names of valleys in Greece. Tempe is a valley in Greece that is favored by god Apollo, and Arcady is the southern part of Greece where inhabitants are known for their simple living. Next, we have the symbols. So, symbolism in poems is the ability to get beyond what words signify and to make larger claims about meanings in the verbal world. Symbols signify something beyond the word's sounds, often things or actions or ideas. Simply put, symbol is something that stands for something else. Okay? We have three kinds of symbols in poetry: the invented symbol, or the no previously agreed upon symbolic significance. So, uh, an invented symbol is a symbol created solely by the poet inside that poem. So, that symbol is exclusive in the poem that is created by the poet kasi it's invented. Or there is no pattern that correlates in that symbol because it's invented by the poet. Or doon lang mismo sa poem na yun makikita yung symbol na yun because it was created only from the pure idea and feelings and expression of the poet. So unlike the invented symbol, the traditional symbol are objects and acts that have built-in or agreed upon significance. So, kabaliktaran siya ng invented symbol since the traditional symbols are, some of the examples are the dove, um, which means peace or harmony, and the skull could mean death or almost death or something that is bound or bad to happen. While we have the candles, burning candles, which could either be a light or something that is melancholic. And then nandun din yung the rising sun. It could also mean the new beginning or a new start, mga ganon. So the third one, the symbolic poem, is a poem made up of entire symbols. So itong Ode to Nightingale is considered as a symbolic poem altogether. Kasi yung Nightingale and the song it sung is the poem's central image and symbol. So dun umiikot yung poem sa Nightingale and sa kanta na naririnig ni Kit from the bird. So the music it produces is the symbol of pure beauty. Also, from the ancient times, the nightingale has been symbolic of love because when Philomela, yun nga yung Greek mythological figure or symbol, also known as the lover of song, she was raped and had her tongue cut out by her attacker. So, as a revenge or to extract her revenge, ginawa siyang nightingale ng mga gods para makapaghiganti. Or to compensate for what happened, she became a nightingale or a symbol of freedom and a newfound love. So, moving on to the sounds of poetry, we have the rhythm or the repetition or correspondence of the terminal sounds of words. We have the free verse without rhythm, without rhyme or regular meter, and the end rhyme and rhyme scheme. So, the Ode to Nightingale has an 8-10 line stanza with a regular rhyme scheme of A B A B C D E C D E. And this kind of rhyme scheme helps the stability of the poem, especially between Keats' description, which alternates between the nightingale and the scenery. So, the rhythmic pattern help between the nightingale and the scenery and the description of Keats' feelings and actions, and altogether from the alternating point of view of the nightingale in the scene. These rhymes seem help in the stability of the poem. Next we have onomatopoeia, which we're all familiar with and are also known as the literal sounds. And then another three important role in the sounds of poetry which is not included in the PowerPoint is the alliteration, assonance, and the consonants. So these altogether, all these sounds can help us in analyzing and interpreting any kind of poetry. There is also relevance to these sounds. and it depends on how we will analyze or interpret a poem. Next, after dealing with the internal forms of the poetry, we have the external. So in external form, we have the stanzas, which is organized by patterns of rhyme and meter, and it can be limitless or fixed. So here are the traditional stanza forms: the terza, rima, Spenserian, and ballad. So for the terza rima, the stanzas are linked to each other by a common sound. So it's a 3 line per stanza. A B A, B C B, C D C. So most likely D E D, and E F E, so on and so forth. So there's like a linking sound in between the two syllables, and we can see that there's another syllable in between, and it goes in the middle of the two syllables. So next we have the Spenserian, or use only 3 rhyme sounds in 9 rhythm lines. So here we have 3 rhythm sounds in a 9 rhythm lines, meaning there is 2 syllables that are together, but another syllable that is separated by another syllable. For example, A B A B B, C B C C, then another rhyming sound that is just like this type of um, rhythmic pattern. So there is 2 syllables that are together, which sounds the same, and the other one on top of it that is separated by another syllable. So next, we have the ballad stanza, or only one set of rhymes in 4 lines. So it's a 4 liner in one stanza, and it's A B C B. So the next line will probably be D E D D E F E. As long as it's a 4 liner in a stanza, it could be a ballad stanza. So next, we have the traditional verse form, or set patterns of rhythm and rhyme that govern the whole poem or parts of them rather than individual stanzas. So we have the couplet, or focused on meter. It focuses on the meter. And we have the blank verse. It has a regular meter but no rhyming scheme. And then the free verse, or then with no regular meter or rhyme at all. So here are some of the form-based subgenres of a poem. We have the sonnet, which is popularized by Shakespeare, and the haiku, which we're also familiar with. Then we have other sub-genres such as the limerick, villanelle, palindrome, and zestina. So, alright, thank you for listening. And as an activity, so based on the poem that we read earlier, write your own analysis regarding John Keats' Ode to Nightingale using the poetic elements. Here are the rubrics for the activity. So, ayun lang ulit. Thank you po for listening.